Hi, welcome to another Tonnau Talks. Today we'll be talking about tackling screen time, something I know a lot of you parents are dealing with our children these days. Today I'm joined by Shuan Davis, who's a trainee educational psychologist with a keen interest in screen time and its effects on our growing children, but also she's come in with some excellent tips and advice for us as parents to be able to help tackle these screen time issues that we have. So, to get started, can you tell me, Shuan, what do you mean by screen time? What does that mean for us as parents?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Karis, because we hear the phrase thrown around quite often in the media, but there's more to it than it first appears. So we know that screen time is any time that we spend interacting with any kind of screen-based device. So that doesn't just mean kind of our mobile phones or our tablets. That can also mean laptops, computers, even TVs, or gaming consoles. And screen time is also broken down into two main categories. Those consist of active usage or active screen time, which is any time that we spend interacting with content on any type of device. So that could be commenting or liking YouTube videos or photos. It could be chatting with friends through gaming consoles. And then there's also passive usage, which is whereby we're not necessarily interacting with our screens, but using them more for entertainment. So whether that be watching TV or just scrolling through social media apps without really engaging with it. And screen time is a new problem that we're dealing with as parents and adults. It's not something that existed for lots of us when we were growing up. And it's something that is increasing massively. So we know that during COVID, children and young people's screen time increased by over 50%. And so it's a new issue that the adults are navigating, and it's difficult to know how we can best support our children with the use of screen time.
Yeah, and I think it's really important there to recognise the different types of screen time because I wasn't aware of that. So you mentioned there that, screen time involves, all of our devices. So that's not just the mobile phones. It's also like the Xbox, the PlayStation, the Nintendo Switch. It could involve iPads and playing games on iPads, but also, interacting with, sort of like television series and stuff like that. It's that time that you're sort of exposed to that electronic device, and we know the effect of that light exposure with those devices. Regardless of the content, just that physical effect of that on the brain is quite huge, isn't it? With our children and not being able to function properly, like go to sleep, because it interferes with the system there of sleep. And I like that you've categorized it in areas such as active usage, posting, and I think that is those children who are actively, responding to things. They're putting their thoughts and opinions and beliefs out there on social media, for example, interacting with Snapchat, because I know that's an app that is very much active, isn't it? It's all about how you interact and the different kind of rules and regulations that these children impose on one another about needing to, post these pictures of them doing whatever they are, and also even their location. Mentioned there then that passive usage, about scrolling, and they've even got a term for it, and they doom scrolling. It doesn't sound good, does it?
No.
And that's highly addictive because the amount of time you can spend, and I'll put my hands up. I do like to scroll on like Instagram, seeing different things of interest. And I can not be aware of how much time I'm spending doing that, and it's very much yeah, I agree, it's doom scrolling, isn't it? Just flicking through these very short videos about different things that you're interested in. It's really important that we are aware of not only our child's usage, but us as adults around our kids, because I grew up in the 90s, and that's when iPhones were invented, and the difference of childhood that a child like myself growing up in the 80s, 90s had compared to what children have now. It's very different, and it's so important that people like myself, we get to learn about, the effects of screen time, because it's something that isn't really familiar with us as adults now. So thinking about that, like, what are the guidance? Because obviously this is something that boomed in the 90s, that the first iPhone came out, what are the guidance around the use of like technology? When you talk about that passive use and active use, what is out there?
So in the UK, there isn't really any hard and fast guidance on technology use for any age group or for any kind of technology use, which is really interesting. It is a topic and a discussion. So you've probably seen it quite a lot in the media, with different schools trialing banning phones and having kind of lockable pockets for phones.
Yeah. There was that documentary on
There was
Netflix,
a documentary, very interesting. And it is something that's been discussed in Parliament. Some research and some organisations have come out and suggested that with the earlier years, it is really important to limit their screen time to a maximum of 1 hour a day. And that should be supervised by an adult, which, when you think of it, for working parents especially, is very difficult. To not only just allow your child such a short amount of time to engage with technology, but also to supervise them during that time. With regard to more active technology use, so when we're thinking about those social media apps, we do know that in the UK, the digital age of consent is 13.
What do you mean by digital age of consent?
So that is the age that the government have deemed children are able to make rational, conscious decisions on social media, and kind of unable to understand the dangers of using social media, which is really interesting, especially when we think of age of consent for other things. So for driving, for instance, for buying paracetamol and ibuprofen, those are significantly higher. And that age of digital consent being 13, it is enforced to a certain degree. So you may have noticed, if you sign up for a social media app, it will ask you your age. And if you enter your age as below 13, it will deny you access. However, that's very easy to overrule. So all a child or young person...
Kids are very clever, aren't they?
Absolutely. All they will need to do is say that they're a year or a few years older than they are, and they'll have instant access then to... that social media app, which the government has decided for children under 15 is not appropriate. It is interesting to note that the government Parliament has considered upping the age of digital consent to 16. That hasn't been actioned, but it does suggest that even as far up as government, people are questioning whether that is appropriate.
And I probably be hated by the teenagers saying this, but I think that's a really good move forward, because I would say that, given the age of consent, to be able to to problem solve and risk assess online, to scrutinize in a way that is as we know, when it's online, it's out there forever. To be able to do that at the age of 13 in response to something that you've seen that's likely to be emotionally charged in some way, the fact that can stick by them for so long is worrying, because, as we know, a teenage brain at the age of 13, their problem solving skills and their rational thinking and their ability to control their impulses are significantly reduced. So actually, I would strongly disagree with that, is that they are at an age that they can make those, reasonable decisions. I don't think that is, appropriate age. And I think we'll get a lot of backlash about thinking about, the age of digital consent being 16. However, our children are in a world where we've changed a lot of things very quickly. They've had to adapt to a number of changes within, legal frameworks, such as, with vaping and things like that. We're changing that. You can't buy disposable vapes. That's going to be put in place. Changing the fact that children won't be able to buy cigarettes because of the changes of consent, the age of consent with that. And I think I don't think we give our kids enough credit where they can adapt to a lot of changes. To be able to safeguard them.
Definitely.
And I think that's something that should be considered.
Absolutely.
Tell me a bit more about, if, we're not there yet, are we, with those government sort of restrictions there? And I'm just wondering how much screen time is too much.
That's a very good question. I think it's one that we hear a lot because, just looking at active and passive screen time, we know that how children engage with the technological devices can differ.
Yeah.
So two children who have the same amount of screen time aren't necessarily doing the same things.
So what is, if you're thinking about that, so, you've got one child who's very active use, so they are posting, they're commenting on things, and then you've got maybe a more passive use where they could maybe just alone in their bedroom scrolling or just playing on their computer games.
Yeah.
What's the harm in those? Like what is too much in terms of difference of those types of uses?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics have actually recommended, regardless of the type of screen time, to limit that to 2 hours a day as a general rule. But you're absolutely right in saying that active screen time and passive screen times, the dangers of those are going to be different.
Yeah.
With active screen time, we're thinking about a child or children getting a bit more interaction and socialization out of that, connection with peers. Whereas with passive, it can be a bit more isolating and lonely. That is, a chance whereby a child usually would be able to maybe interact with others, maybe their families or their friends, but now are instead doing something that can be quite isolating. So while there is no kind of universal rule, some signs that your children or young people might be spending too much time on screen time can be identified from considering if they've stopped doing things that they enjoy, so they maybe their clubs or their hobbies. If they've started choosing to spend time on their devices instead of doing those things that they enjoy.
Okay, so like if you were asking your kid, should we go to the park to kick football around? And they're kind of like, no, wanting to prefer to stay in their room and play the computer game.
Absolutely.
Those are the types of things that you need to look out for, is it?
Definitely. No, that's exactly right. Or if your child is showing hesitancy to go to maybe their normal after school clubs because they just want to stay at home and then message their friends. Also, if you're finding that it's difficult to get your child's attention when they're on their screen, calling their name, not getting an answer.
They're in the same room as you, but they cannot hear you because they are locked into that phone, aren't they?
Absolutely. And also if your child or young person starts to act kind of out of character and when you do take that phone away or when they're not able to access their screens and their devices.
Yeah, God forbid if the Wi-Fi is ever down, isn't it?
That's it.
That's a real problem, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And these are all very usual things, isn't it, that we would experience. There are going to be times where our children decide, oh, I'll come home from school, I don't want to go to my club, I'm just going to chill in my bedroom. And chilling in their bedroom actually means playing on their devices, having that screen time. And you mentioned there about getting difficulty getting their attention. That's often the case. They may be more fixated on what's going on in their phone, and we're chatting to them thinking, okay, it's time now to chat. And actually what can be happening for them on that phone, especially if they're an active user, there might be something really important in their world going on Snapchat that they need to stay locked into and respond to, and that can be quite distressing for some of our kids, not to have that access. I think a lot of kids would act out of character if we took away their devices, and I think that's the fear that a lot of parents have, isn't it? That, gone are the days that you can say, right, that's it, you're banned from using this, that, and the other, because that can be extremely distressing for our children, which to me is worrying, the fact that a child would act so distressed and out of character. But it is very common. And I'm just thinking, like, what if as a parent now I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, do you know what? I've answered yes to some of these questions. What do I need to do?
I think for any parents who are listening who do feel like those prompts to relate to their child or young person, that does kind of show us that your child is showing signs of dependency on their technology and then the technological devices, and that it's probably a good sign that we start thinking about how we can limit their technological usage.
Okay.
And how we can provide them with different opportunities to meet whatever needs that their screen time is giving them. So whether that be with that more active usage, that socialization and interaction,
Yeah.
or whether that be an opportunity to regulate and calm through using through watching TV programs. That's an indicator to us adults that we need to think about then cutting down on that screen time with support.
So to a lot of parents, Siobhan, that would come across as very frightening. Like, why? That, you know, because is it all that bad? You know, is screen time all that bad for our kids? And I think that's something that, you know, a lot of parents might find is that actually it's their opportunity for their child to have that downtime. You know, they've been in school all day learning, maybe on the laptops as well in school.
Yeah.
You know, they've, you know, been active, they've been socializing, and now maybe it's time to have that downtime. You know, a lot of parents might find, well, actually, I can cook dinner whilst the smaller children are busy using that screen time. You know, they're maybe playing games and that's stimulating for their brain or whatever, you know, maybe that they're doing. So I'm going to, you know, challenge you with that question of, you know, is it really all that bad?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Caris, because it is important to recognise that technology is a part of our society and that's not going away.
No.
It's something that we're going to have to adapt to, and it's not something that we're going to be able to eradicate.
Yeah.
And you are right in that there are some advantages to screen time for our children and young people. And so if we think about COVID, technology was you know, life-saving for a lot of our children and young people. They were still able to access their learning and engage with their schoolwork through using technology. And even now we see lots of interactive learning apps like Duolingo that really help motivate some of our children and young people to learn new skills, which is amazing. As we've already touched on a little bit as well, screen time can help our children and young people to feel connected with others, with their peers, especially when we're thinking about perhaps families who live more rurally, whereby their children wouldn't have an opportunity so much to go and play outside with their peers. And that is offering them that opportunity.
And also, I guess, you know, like you often hear, you know, the girls tend to be more active in the way that they seeking connection with others, you know, through, you know, texting, responding to TikToks, you know, sending maybe their friends those different videos that they're seeing, commenting on things. Whereas our boys tend to be kind of more, you know, playing the computer games. But actually, a lot of, you know, the Xbox, PlayStations, they can all play together online virtually. So, you know, they can talk to one another. And it's, what's kind of nice sometimes when you see, you know, teenagers or even children playing these games online with their friends is that they're problem solving, they're having a shared experience. You know, it is something that you can see that, you know, brings, you know, excitement out to them, that those nice emotions that and those feelings that help promote that kind of social interaction as well. And what other things, you know, would you say is kind of a more positive reframe on technology?
It's like what you've just said, Cara. It's about learning those new skills, so those problem solving skills, and also those technological literacy skills. Those are going to be massive for our children and young people as they get older.
Well, yeah, because we know that a lot of well, the majority of careers these days rely on those technological skills. You know, how much of our, you know, employability relies upon being able to access, you know, a lot more complicated, you know, technology than just a laptop, isn't it? There's so many things that you know, virtually is incredible the way that technology is going. But you know, that again though, the way that technology is kind of, you know, very fast-paced moving. You know, we've got AI currently that is moving really, really fast. It does bring us concerns about the safety of our children online. You know, what are the risks to our children, especially those that are accessing technology that involves online interactions, Siobhan?
So there are a number of risks to technology use for our children and young people, and these include some real risks to our children's safety and their well-being. So I know sometimes it feels as though screen time's happening at home and so our children are safe, but really when they're accessing those devices, they could be talking to anyone about anything. And that's not something that we're always aware of as adults. We're not always seeing what our children are doing on their phones because we're busy and we've got things to do as well. Some of these risks we're more familiar with. So if we think about cyberbullying, is probably something a lot of parents have thought about.
And we call that trolling, don't we?
Trolling, yeah, absolutely. And research has shown that almost 40% of our children and young people have received hurtful messages and comments from people they know online.
And that's really worrying, because ultimately, years ago, bullying would tend to happen either in school or out in the park in the community, and actually when children went home, in a way that was their safe space and that kind of, ability to stay away from that. And unfortunately now the problem with our phones and different technology is that children are able to be bullied within their home, there's no escape from it. And I think that's really worrying, and that huge impact on our children's mental health is massive. And I know obviously there's that trolling, that bullying, but there's other types of dangerous content that our children are exposed to, and I know there's obviously those extreme violence, hate speech, racism. We've seen a lot of this toxic masculinity that's also kind of mentioned online. What other types of things can our children be exposed to?
So there is really a plethora. There's no end to the amount of dangerous content our children can be exposed to online, and content that promotes dangerous behaviours as well. So
what do you mean by that?
So that can include things like disordered eating or disordered eating habits.
So would you say that's like from children looking at, say for example, Instagram, where everyone posts their, best life, isn't it? All the good bits. You'd say that seeing images like that online, or different influencers promoting kind of this way of living actually are promoting an unhealthy lifestyle.
Absolutely, and even more explicitly than that, you'll have influencers selling certain diet shakes and diet products or fad diets and things that are actively encouraging our children and our young people to eat or think about food in a disordered way. And research has shown that up to almost 50% of teens have said that social media has made them feel worse about their bodies and about their eating, which is very high. And so we know this is a real impact that our teens are feeling.
And that's really worrying, isn't it? Because the fact that we're seeing that 46% of teens saying social media made them feel worse about their bodies. That's really worrying, isn't it? I think years ago it was magazines, wasn't it, or television then. But the fact that it's this tiny little device that's got access to the world, in their hand, which is their mobile phones, can really have that huge effect on their self-esteem and their image about their bodies. Is really worrying. And I know that a lot of these influencers, or just the content that they're seeing online, as we've seen a high rise in these dangerous challenges. And a lot of teenagers, more so teenage boys, I would say, have been at risk of engaging in these kind of risk-taking challenges in a way to sort of gain likes and interest and kudos in that sense. It's been quite dangerous, isn't it?
Definitely. We've had some really worrying trends and challenges over the past few years on social media, and these have led to serious physical harm and sometimes even fatalities for children and young people.
That's worrying.
It is very worrying. And just to give some examples, because I think looking into some of these trends, it's really shocking just the extent to which that these are incredibly dangerous. So we have one example which went viral a few years ago was the blackout challenge, whereby children were encouraged to film choking themselves until they passed out, and then post that on social media. There's also what was called the Tide Pods challenge, which is where children were encouraged to eat detergent pods over social media, and These
And
are
they're
things,
highly toxic, aren't
they
they?
are highly toxic, and they're things that as parents we think our children know better.
Yeah, yeah.
But when seeing such an influx of content of people their age engaging with these dangerous activities, being okay afterwards, and then getting a lot of, like you said, kudos for it,
Yeah.
that is highly appealing.
Yeah. Especially for our young teenagers, because they're at that stage in their life where the most important thing to them is their social interactions and that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
So they want to be perceived positively with their peers, not with adults, it's with the peers that they want to look good.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as we just spoke about, their problem solving, their impulse control, and all of that, it does not do them any good when they're trying to get that sense of belonging and affiliation with their peers. That's really worrying. And why would our children engage in this? What is the psychology around these trends?
Absolutely. So just like you were saying, Caris, it's about that seeking connection. So especially for young teenagers, their brains are wired to seek connection with their peers and with their friends. They start to move away from getting that gratification from family and from parents, because they're starting to learn that there's a bigger world out there and they want to fit in that world somewhere. There's also the case of children and young teenagers as well, especially, are very impressionable at that point in their lives. They learn from observing others and then copying their behaviours. And so when they are seeing, like we were saying, their friends engaging in these challenges and then receiving a lot of social gratification, a lot of rewards from that, in terms of the chemicals our body releases, when we get people liking our content, when we get people commenting and telling us how much they enjoy watching our videos or seeing our photos, that can be a massive push for children and young people. And they still haven't developed those parts of their brain whereby they're able to think critically about things and consider things and the dangers. We know the brain doesn't develop fully until we're 25 years old. And when we're thinking about, if we go back to the age of digital consent, 13 years of age, that is miles away from that full brain development whereby our children are really able to consider those dangers of engaging with this type of content.
Yeah. And that can have huge effects on the brain development, like you're saying about our brains not being fully developed until we're 25. And that just causes huge concern about that mental well-being as well.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that before about the effect of social media affecting people's body image, being bullied online. That's got to have a huge impact on mental health, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And we know that excessive use of social media has been linked to increased levels of even anxiety and depression, which are severe mental health conditions in children and young people. And we know that's linked to that constant comparison between our youngsters feeling as though they're not good enough or they have to improve in some ways, and feeling as though they have to have this perfect image can really impact their self-esteem and result to those more serious mental health conditions.
Yeah. And again, as we know, with increased, mental health issues comes that kind of isolation, isn't there? And that loneliness and that, I think, as well, is something that a lot of children who may be feeling lonely and isolated, often they can find, a group online, can't they, that kind of helps them to feel part of something. And I think that's something that's, quite common, isn't it, with our children seeking connections outside of their, physical community, and actually finding, connections with others online who may not be a very good, role model for them.
Absolutely.
And how is that loneliness and that isolation impacting on our children, do you think?
Yeah, it does have a massive impact, because we know that even children who are very active social lives through their phones, that digital connectedness does not replace physical connection. It's not the same. And so it may substitute it to a certain degree, but we're finding that not only are children and young people having less opportunities to connect with others physically in person, but also that connecting with people online is making our children and young people feel like they don't have the skills to be able to communicate and to interact with people in person. They're not practicing those skills. And so that can make it even more anxiety inducing then for children and young people to communicate with people in the physical community, like you were saying.
And we're finding that as well, isn't it? A lot about the generation coming up is that what people are finding is that they find it very difficult to manage social communication interactions in the workplace, so our 20-year-olds now, our young 20-year-olds are finding that, when they are faced with challenges within their work environment that involve interacting with others directly, which all jobs will have some form of that, they're finding that really difficult, and actually, it's really affecting their ability to, able to have successful careers and jobs, because they're finding that such a challenge. And I think when we think about technology use and its impact on, we've talked about the impact on brain development, we've talked about the mental health risks as well. I do worry about that physical health as well, because I know we talk so much about sleep, don't we, and how important that is. And we, I talked even earlier about my own experience of thinking, sometimes I can go flicking on my phone on Instagram, and time just flies by, and and if it's it's sleep, as we know, is so important, and we did a Tonnau talk on sleep about that, how important it is for the brain, to just process the day's information and experiences. Tell us more a little bit about the physical aspects, Joanne.
So screen time definitely has a real impact on our children and our teens' physical health as well, especially like you were saying, their sleep. So we know that sleep and our circadian rhythm is disrupted by screen time use, partly because of the light, so the blue light that the phones or gaming consoles or any type of technology emit, can disrupt our body's ability to be able to scan our environment and begin to unwind and release those chemicals that help us to sleep when the day comes to an end. We also know that 1/3 of teens admit to waking in the night to check their devices to see if they've missed messages.
Really? Gosh.
Yeah. So we're talking here about teens who are purposefully waking up in the night to check their phones.
So you're saying 1 in 3 teens purposefully wake up during the night to check their phones?
Yeah.
Gosh, okay, that's huge. And you think about not only the interruption of that sleep cycle, but because it's been interrupted by waking, getting back into a sleep cycle, again, is even more difficult. There's huge effects on the brain.
Definitely.
That's very worrying.
It is very worrying. Yeah.
Okay. We mentioned there about, the blue light and the effect on the eyes. I know that can be, we found, haven't we, like the fine motor control of children, isn't it? Their thumbs being used for consoles are, overdeveloped in that sense, and their ability to hold a pen and have that fine motor grip in different ways is being noted as well, and you mentioned there about the strain on the eyes as well. I want to go back to what you mentioned about safety, because I think that, as much as we can talk about all these different things that impact, like, it's the physical stuff, I am really concerned about the safety, because we are hearing so much more about, children being able to be bullied within their home, not by their family, but by, anyone, isn't it, online? It really worries me about children's safety online. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on there?
Yeah, definitely. We know that children and teens can unknowingly and sometimes even knowingly share their personal information online with people that they shouldn't be.
Okay.
If we're thinking about apps like Snapchat, like Instagram, many of these apps have location features whereby anyone who follows a child or young person is able to see where they are at all times.
Wow. So what you're saying there then, so you could work out where a child lives.
Yeah.
You could easily work out where they go to school.
Absolutely.
Because you've just got to check on the certain times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those settings are automatic. So if your child downloads, for instance, Snapchat, they will automatically have those settings enabled. And it's only if they go back and disable those settings that then their location will not be shared with people. And so it's very easy to find out where a child is physically based on their social media.
So it doesn't mean that they need to post where they are.
No.
It's just constantly running in the background. So you can go onto your app and you can find out where this child is.
Yeah.
And they're not your child.
No. And it's really worrying because it's really easy to befriend people on these apps as well, to add friends. They have kind of mechanics whereby they'll give you friend suggestions based on who your friends are friends with, and these might be people that you've never met before. But we know for our children and young people who are seeking that connection, they may accept every friend request that comes their way without knowing who
good,
it is.
Doesn't it? If they have all these friends online, they look popular.
Absolutely, and we know children and young people to brag about how many friends they've got online, how many followers they've got.
Wow. So, like you said earlier, anyone can really have one of these apps.
Yeah.
Like you say, if you're too young, you just change the dates.
Yeah.
Or you could be actually the other way, be an adult pretending to be a child.
Definitely.
That is really worrying about those types of predators, isn't it? So if they can see where that your child is in school, they can work out where they go to school, they can kind of work out where they live.
Yeah.
It's really worrying about the risks of that. What do we know about the online predators? What kind of...
So we know that nearly 6 out of 10 girls, so that's almost 60% of teenage girls, have been contacted by a stranger online. Not just contacted by a stranger online, but contacted in a way that has made them feel uncomfortable. Wow. Which is a massive statistic.
That's over 50%.
That's over 50% of girls. Yeah. Especially when you think about how those strangers online may also be able to access these girls' location, then that's very worrying. In terms of the impact that can have on their mental well-being, but also on their physical safety. And if you think about these 6 out of 10 teen girls, those are people who have been able to identify that these are strangers and that these are unwanted contacts. Whereas when we think about maybe our children and our young people who are more impressionable, they may not realise that this contact that they're making with strangers is inappropriate, or that could pose a danger to them, which is a really worrying statistic.
Yeah, gosh, it is, and that in itself is worrying, that the fact that we've got 6 out of 10 girls are aware that they've been contacted by a stranger and it's made them feel uncomfortable, whereas we've got the more vulnerable children who don't necessarily, don't have those skills necessarily to see that as unwanted.
Definitely.
Gosh, okay. What about our social skills, our communication skills? Because I know we get a lot of information online via text, simply the text, and we're missing out on those facial cues. We're missing out on the tone of voice. And we know that, 93% of communication is everything but the word, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So you think about the amount of communication that's been miscommunicated just via these, text messages, these comments, these images that they're seeing with quotes, or people just typing things. Tell us a little bit more about that and the development of our children.
Yeah, so technology use can have a much wider impact on the development of our children when we think about school and when we think about their communication. So childhood and adolescence is an essential part of life to developing those social skills, to reading those facial expressions and the body language. And social media and screen time can then become harmful when it replaces the time that children and young people have to develop those skills. Many of the opportunities that we have to build social skills, so like reading that body language and those facial expressions, we can't recreate that online. That's something that our children and young people are missing out on. And I watched an interview recently with a doctor who said that the rise in young children who are presenting as non-verbal, so who are not talking and not speaking at all, and instead are maybe echoing phrases they've heard on TV, or are just choosing not to communicate or are not able to communicate, correlate with this increase of use with technology that we know especially young children are experiencing. And that can have a wider impact then on learning and development when we think about concentration, our ability for our children and young people to pay attention in school when they're used to engaging with content that is tailored towards being highly entertaining and addictive, and then being in school engaging with learning that maybe they're not as interested in can be very difficult.
And we know that with the huge rise in people experiencing poor attention and concentration, we're seeing a rise in the amount of children that have been diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And you're right, unfortunately, children are brand new when they're born, and I always like to say, their brain is like us building the house up until the age of 25, after the age of 25, you just do the upkeep and maintenance, to keep it ticking over. However, it is essential that we give our children the best possible opportunities from birth to 25. And that includes ensuring that they are able to attend to more than 30 seconds of a video clip. Because what we're finding with children, especially with scrolling, they're flicking, through the videos so quickly that they're not even paying attention for the first 5 seconds. Within 5 seconds, they will often flick because they haven't found it interesting. What you'll then see is some children flick backwards because their brain has not processed enough of that information, and they might go, oh, I might have found it interesting because there was a dog on it. I like dogs. I'll go back. And you can see there that the impulsivity is high because they flick quickly before realizing that even with such high interest content like technology, their ability to attend to information is really, really poor. And I think it's going to really, really affect our children in their ability to learn because they're highly stimulated. Gone are the days that you're just listening to your teacher throughout the day to learn from. They want to see different faces. They want to see different content. They want to see lots of, lights, camera, action type of stuff, to be able to maintain their interest. And we're seeing that a lot with even little children coming to school. They're so connected to that tablets, aren't they? That actually they don't want to part from their tablet, let alone their parents. And that's really worrying to see that a child is seeking connection and comfort from a tablet rather than it being their parents.
Absolutely.
Thinking about the different, I was talking there about, flicking through these different videos and obviously things come up, don't they? Like, I'm aware that, I get hooked into these things because when I scroll, it's only things that I like. It's like it's learnt what I like. And I know it does the same for children because no one's Reels page is ever going to be the same as others because it's clever, isn't it? These systems. How is it that our children are exposed to the content that keeps them hooked?
So that's a really good point, Caris, and it's all to do with the algorithm, which is the mechanism that social media apps are designed around to make it addictive and to tailor it to people's interests in order to keep them engaging with it for longer. Because that's what these social media apps want, is for people to be engaging with them for as long as possible. This works through showing our children and young people content that's similar to what they've already engaged with. Now, some people think this just relates to content that they might have liked or commented on, but this can even count as content that they maybe have, like you just said, scrolled back to, or that they'd watched for even a few seconds longer than they typically watch. Which is alarming because we know that content that children and young people tend to watch for longer is the content that tends to elicit a strong emotional reaction. And those are not always positive emotional reactions. So if they scroll upon a video which makes them shocked, they may spend a few more seconds on that video processing what they've seen.
Yeah, and they may share that video with a
They
peer
may
saying, "Oh my
share
gosh,
it.
have you seen this?"
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what starts it then. They start getting all of these videos of shocking content
Absolutely.
flooding their brain. It's really worrying. And that's where I'm starting to ask that question, you know, I'm going to say, you know, are our children addicted to technology?
So it's quite a controversial question because I think the word addiction, a lot of us hear, and it's quite a loaded term. But features like buttons and notifications and automatic videos, they are designed to give the brain a chemical reward to keep us hooked and to keep us going back for more. We know that technology use can interfere with sleep and with physical health and with communication. And research has shown us that around 25% of children and young people show addictive behaviours towards their technology use. And that's a massive number, really, if you think about that's 1 in 4. So a class of 30 pupils, you know, you'd be expecting a decent amount of those to show addictive behaviours towards their technology use.
So if you've got, for example, you know, family of 4, one of those children are likely to be addicted.
Yeah.
That's worrying.
Yeah.
So what apps would you say are the most addictive? What the ones that we should be most concerned about?
So we've already talked quite a bit about certain apps like Snapchat, whereby we can share location, which does pose a threat to our children and young people's safety. There are also other streaming apps that a lot of parents aren't aware about, such as Twitch, whereby children and young people can stream themselves to the whole world playing video games or talking about whatever it is they want to talk about, and strangers can watch that, and strangers can actually pay our children and young people over those apps and leave comments and make requests for them to do certain things or act in a certain way.
Really? So they're getting paid?
They can get paid.
Gosh, wow.
By strangers.
So a child can be playing a computer game online.
Yeah.
And it's live streamed.
Yeah.
So I assume there's a camera on the child's face then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a stranger can comment on there and pay a child to do something.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, that's really worrying.
It is very worrying. We know we have other apps as well, whereby children can video call with strangers, and so it will almost be like a bit of a roulette, and you'll go through 5 minutes with a different stranger on video call, and there's no way of protecting your child from what that stranger may say or do or show your child.
Gosh, right.
And so there are a lot of dangers out there beyond what we first think about when we think of technology use and apps and websites.
Okay, that's really worrying, isn't it? The amount out there that can, you know, target young, vulnerable children. And we've not only got incentives like, you know, the number of likes, you know, the comments, the positive feedback, but also children can actually get paid. You can get money, you know, and that to me is really, really worrying. So thank you, Shuan, for all that information about the different types of technology use, but also the huge amount of different impacts on our child's development, including the risks as well. So what can we do? This is what we really want to help with. What can we do to manage screen time?
Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of parents have, because this is a new problem that we're dealing with. It's not something that our parents have to deal with, so it's not something that we've experienced in ourselves and are able to relate to our children in that way about. So it can be challenging. But there are some effective strategies that as parents we can try to use when we think about limiting screen time for our children.
And with these different strategies, I mean, I think the first thing we want to think about is that communication, isn't it? Because first of all, we need to start communicating, you know, the risks that we've just come aware of, isn't it? But also being able to show that empathy as well. And I know in our previous time talks, we talked about talking to teens. You know, it's a different way to communicate, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Especially about something that is so important to them as their technology use. So tell us, how can we communicate and show empathy to our young people?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is it's a really important first step before we think about kind of implementing those rules or implementing those boundaries around technology use. It's important that we just have a discussion with our children and our teens about technology. Prior to this session, we didn't know all the dangers of technology use, and our children and our teens aren't either. Um, it's important that they understand safe and healthy technology habits and why you might be setting boundaries around this, because if they don't, if there's no meaning in it for them, then they're not going to appreciate that what you're doing isn't a punishment. It's not something to make them feel bad or take away something they enjoy, but it's actually something that hopefully will benefit them. Um, what these discussions might look like can vary, so depending on the age of your child and what type of technology that they use. So it's important that you really talk to them in a way that is relevant to them, and relevant to the type of technology that they're using, whether that's gaming, whether that's social media, whether they're engaging with that actively or passively. So we really need to think about how our children and young people are using their technology and how we can start enabling those discussions with them about what they get from that, and some of those dangers as well around technology use.
And I guess it's in a way, not in a way to reprimand bad behaviour and say, right, that's it, I'm taking your phone off you or your Xbox off you, or I'm shutting down the Wi-Fi in the house, because I think unfortunately that can cause our children to go seek it elsewhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think, it's important what you said about communicating with them openly and saying, look, I'm not doing this because I want to, make you upset or, take away your things from you, but I want to do it in a way that's trying to promote a healthier lifestyle and also, sharing about those risks involved as well.
Definitely.
And I think that's key, isn't it? Before you can start setting clear boundaries. And what would those clear boundaries look like, Siobhan?
So again, it's going to vary depending on your child, their age, and how they use technology. And once we have that understanding of from that communication, what that serves for them, so what our children are getting out of the technology, we can start thinking about setting those boundaries. And again, this is going to look different for your child, and it'll be up to you to decide what you think is appropriate for your child. But we can think about kind of monitoring technology use through identifying possibly phone-free zones in the house or tablet-free zones in the house, whether that at first maybe is the kitchen,
Yeah.
And deciding that this is an area in the house where no one uses their phones, not just our child or young person, but also us as adults as well.
And I know some parents worry that if they have a phone-free, room in their house, that the child won't want to come down and talk to them. And I think it's about recognizing that actually, I want to talk to you. I want to listen to how your day's been. I want to, chat to you about, football scores from last night, instead of it being a place where they come down. You often see kids, they walk down the stairs looking at their screen, their hand in front of their face, walk through the hallway into the kitchen, grab whatever they need to. You could be in there going, hey, how's it going? They can't hear you because they're so locked into that device. And they're missing really, important conversations. And also it's like that time to really connect with your child again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, isn't it, having those rules and boundaries, it's key to have it appropriate for the age, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I think, boundaries around, time setting as well, certain times before bedtime, I think it's really important that we restrict then because we know the impact it has on sleep, which is so important. And again, when you told me that there's children waking up during the night to check their phones, for me, I'd want to make sure that those phones are switched off during the night to avoid that, because that's having a huge impact on their sleep. How would you monitor their usage though? Because that's one thing. Our kids are so clever. They're more clever than us. They find ways around these things, and that's one thing as a parent for me. I'm thinking, where would I even begin to monitor or control their device in that way? Tell me a bit more about that.
So yeah, there are multiple ways that we can think about monitoring screen time and technology use for our children and young people. We know that there are parental controls, so the majority of phones and tablets and technological devices will have inbuilt parental controls that will allow you to block certain content, to filter the type of content that your child or young person sees, and also to monitor what they have been engaging with on a regular basis. Um, these settings are often accessed through the device settings for whatever technological device that you were using. And there are apps available as well that can support with this. But these can be really helpful even for setting kind of time blocks on certain apps.
Okay.
So that they will shut off or shut down after, say, 30 minutes is spent on them in a day,
Okay.
which is useful both for monitoring screen time. Maybe on a weekly basis, you can sit down with your child or young person and see how much time they've spent on their device based on their settings, and think about over time implementing those kind of time blocks on certain apps that you think may be hindering your child or young person.
Well, that's good though. So when we're thinking about in terms of, monitoring their use, because like you talked about those risks of potential predators and things like that. So it would be like monitoring the use of certain apps, such as like those sharing apps like Snapchat and things like that, so that unless they're old enough to use that. And also, can I just say that the age guidelines is just a guideline on Snapchat. Do you mean, so it doesn't mean because they have turned 13 that they are then entitled to that app. If you don't feel it's a safe app for your child, regardless of their chronological age, if they don't have the essential skills to keep themselves safe online, then that's your choice to make as a parent to safeguard them.
Absolutely.
And I do like to be able to control the amount of time, because I think again, in a way, it might help our children to budget time in that sense, to think, okay, should I be on my phone now when the telly's on and I'm watching my favorite program? Because we often see that kids double dosing in a way. They'll be on their phones whilst also watching telly, or have their laptops open as well. They're flooding their brain with so much information that actually the brain isn't taking any of it in, because it's too much at in the short space of time. So I think that's really helpful to know that we as parents can do that. But again, Siobhan, what my concern is that kind of backlash parents will get from their kids, about those, restrictions, because as we know, what they're getting from their devices is a dopamine hit. And that feels good. That's nice. They want it more. And what we know with these sort of dopamine hits is that, you might go on Instagram or TikTok and see a nice video of a puppy doing something funny. You get a dopamine hit. However, the problem is the next time you see an equally as nice video of a puppy, you won't get the same level of dopamine. So actually what you're constantly chasing is that initial dopamine hit, which you'll never reach again. You'll never reach that high again. You're constantly chasing and chasing to get that hit that doesn't exist for you anymore, because your brain adapts to it. And that's the thing, is that our kids are getting addicted in that way, is because of those receptors in the brain. So in a way, by restriction, we're only causing our children to kind of seek it elsewhere. So what can we do? Like offer an alternative. What can we do?
Absolutely. I think it's really important for us to offer choices to our children and young people. So to think about, going back to that kind of discussion, identifying what it is that technology is, what function it's serving for our children and young people, and how we can replace that for them. We don't want to just take that away from them. We want to then offer them opportunities to continue to experience, like you said, that dopamine, those feel-good emotions, in a way that isn't through accessing technology.
What kind of things can we do then?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important for us to involve our child or our young person in that decision making, that rule making process, and to give them choices. So, for example, saying, right, we're going to limit your screen time to, let's say, an hour a day. Would you like that hour to be in the morning or in the afternoon? And seeing, allowing them an element of control over that change, so that they feel as though they are valued in that decision.
What about if your child says, okay, I'm going to use it for the afternoon, and actually, you know, in the morning they wake up and they really want that hour.
Yeah.
Can they negotiate to change that? Is that something that we'd do to be flexible?
Yeah, I think it would be really important to remind them of their commitment, their original commitment to um engaging in the afternoon with their technological
Yeah.
device. And then if they are really, you know, kind of wanting to engage with that, also reminding them of the consequences that will
Yeah.
cause as well.
Yeah.
So if you do decide to go on your phone this morning, that means you won't be able to go on it this afternoon.
Yeah. And I think in a way that's where we maybe consider, okay, look, do you know what? If you want to use your hour now,
Yeah.
okay, use half an hour now.
Absolutely.
Then you've got your half an hour then for
Yeah.
the afternoon. And I think it's about helping our kids to problem solve through these difficult kind of,
Definitely.
challenges. Because ultimately, if they're going to wake and they've agreed to, okay, I'm going to just use it at night time after school, they might want to check something in the morning. It might be
Yeah.
really important to them, and I would empathize with that, the fact that it is really important to them, and it's how we go about, right, okay, well, if you use half an hour now,
Yeah.
then you've got half an hour for later, and work that up. It's really important we try and get it right for them, but it's still vitally important that we work through the challenges rather than just giving up. Oh, that didn't work.
Definitely.
And that helps our children in life later on. It's about developing that resilience, isn't it, to change, and it helps them to overcome difficulties, because to them, even though to us it's not, we might not think it's that big a deal, but to them it really is. And it's about recognizing that.
Yeah.
And when it's getting difficult, what kind of things can we help them with, when they are going to find it challenging when you're putting these, boundaries in, monitoring their use, I know you said offering choice and like variety of different things, like getting board games out.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I did, I've done that with my own family, and like we've got board games out and we've had so much fun. But again, it's about continuing to offer that, because the technology comes back in so quickly,
Definitely.
and that's the thing. It's about going back to, okay, do you know what, we did enjoy this, let's try it again. But what about when there's times where there's, moments where children are finding it really difficult? What can we do?
I think it's again really important to empathize with them. This is something that's very difficult for our children and young people, and for us to support them through that as well. When we were talking about how 25% of children show addictive behaviours towards their smartphones, towards the technological devices, it's normal for us to expect some upset from our children, some pushback, especially when they're at those points in the day where they really feel like they need their technological device. And it's okay for them to push against those boundaries and to test those boundaries. And that's why it's important that we're consistent with them. So offering them that opportunity to be flexible and get problem solving alongside them, whilst also reminding them of the importance of these boundaries, and giving them that empathy in terms of supporting their emotional regulation, their ability to keep calm, and to think about future consequences, future behaviours. And we have got another Tonnau talk on managing dysregulation, which can be useful to refer to if that is something that you anticipate for your child and young person. But it's equally important as well for us to recognize the successes of our children and young people, and with just as much of our attention to celebrate that with them when they have chosen to put their device down, or they have listened, or kind of tried out a new rule in terms of, say, a phone free zone in the house, and to be balanced in our empathy and our support of them during that time.
That's good. So where should we start?
Yeah.
That's the big question.
Definitely. I think can be quite overwhelming thinking about cutting down phone time, screen time, because it's a big task and we want to take small steps. And so really, based off what we've been saying, I would probably suggest that the best place to start is really protecting that bedtime and protecting sleep, because we know that is so important for our children and young people, and that it can interfere with sleep quality. So even considering restricting kind of the use of technology for 30 minutes before bed can be a good place to start. And thinking about what alternative activities that your child could do in that time, whether that's reading a story, whether that's chatting with you and kind of offloading about their day or having a bath. And kind of considering not allowing our children and young people or managing the use of technology in bedrooms at night as well, kind of taking a bit of a step backward and maybe then moving backwards and working backwards from that nighttime routine and closer into the day as your child starts to become used to reducing their screen time.
And I think that's key, isn't it? Let's start small and achievable, because ultimately this is going to be a big change, especially if your child has got free range use of their technology devices.
Definitely.
And I think that's a really good one, starting with the bedtime, because as we know, sleep is so important to the developing brain, and again, having those stimulus before bedtime is only going to keep them awake. So if you can reduce that exposure to that blue light, to the dopamine hit, the flicking or whatever it may be, the Xbox, that's a really good place to start. And again, certainly thinking about how we protect our children during the night, especially for those who are on their devices throughout the night. And I think we often get that with our, maybe our teenagers, that they're still on their phones at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I think that is really detrimental to their, not only their brain development, but their well-being.
Definitely.
And I think if we can put in parental controls, such as, turning off the Wi-Fi, and it being something that the whole family are involved in.
Absolutely.
You as the parent are going to set these boundaries. Okay, you could come with that purpose as right, I want to make a difference in this house, and we need to stop using our devices before bedtime, and certainly throughout the night. So therefore, the Wi-Fi is going to be turned off, or I'm going to put these parental controls on. Certainly having the teenagers involved in negotiating when that is and how it's going to be done. Certainly it's not them to be in control of it, but certainly they need to be part of that agreement, because when they've made part of it, they're more likely to stick to it, rather than having this imposed on them.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Siobhan. It's been a really, really interesting Tonnau Talks. I've learned a lot as a parent, but also as a user of technology myself. I'm certainly going to come away with this thinking about how I'm going to make healthier changes, because I am also, I do have the ability to sit there and zone out and look at my phone, and it's not good. Although there are many benefits to technology use, and technology is here to stay, as we know, but it's about how we do it in a healthy way, isn't it?
Definitely.
So let's just review what would be our Tonnau top tips. Top tips. We always do this on our Tonnau Talks. It's just a helpful way for us to be able to go away with some top tips from today's talk. So, Siobhan, what would you say are the Tonnau's top tips for tackling technology?
Well, I think we've covered a lot today, but if we were to summarize the main points, I think it's to be mindful of the different types of screen time and social media use. This doesn't just mean phone and tablet and TV, but actually it can relate to any type of screen, and this can be active usage or passive usage. I think it's also really important for us to keep in mind that digital age of consent being 13. And even though that is questioned, and lots of people think that should be higher, but that is quite often a good boundary, especially when we're thinking of younger children's use of social media apps. That is something that they are not at the developmental stage to be able to use safely.
Well, even like things like Roblox, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's got obviously there's thousands, I believe, thousands of games on the Roblox app itself, but children are able to communicate with one another. And, the majority of children are under the age of 13, aren't they, that access Roblox. So, yeah, it's something to be very mindful of, isn't
It
it?
definitely is. And with that information then, based off of kind of understanding screen time, kind of understanding what it does for your child and young person, why it's so important to them, what function, what needs they get that are met through using technology, and being mindful of the dangers and the detriment that that can be to your child and young person's development and health and safety as well. Um, and for us to start thinking then about implementing those boundaries in collaboration with our teenagers, with our children, and being open and honest and modeling to them safe and healthy technology use.
Exactly. We've got to be the role models in this,
Yeah,
haven't we?
yeah,
And yeah, that's something I'm mindful of is myself as a parent. How am I showing, what example am I showing to my children, with my own use of technology? And I think it does start with us as parents first to be thinking, okay, well, how am I using mine? How am I relying on it? What am I getting from it?
yeah,
And before then we can start to think about, okay, what's a healthy restriction here? And I think if all parents can go away today with just doing that for themselves, to start, showing that as a sort of role model to their children, to recognize the drawbacks and dangers of it.
absolutely.
Yeah, so, and I think it's that continuous monitoring, isn't it, that you
Yeah,
mentioned about with our children, is like how we monitor it in a safe way and to be in a protective way rather than, a way is to be kind of imposing these boundaries on them that it's unfair or that it's used as a way to reprimand our kids. It's like, I'm going to take your device off you. I don't think that's very helpful,
no,
even though sometimes it feels like it's our only way of, putting in those boundaries as
yeah,
parents. Sometimes we kind of, feel like we're at a loss, don't we? What can
definitely.
we impose on our children to try and teach them a lesson? And actually, it opens up another can of worms, doesn't
It
it?
does, it
But
does.
that's been lovely. I think it's been really, really helpful today to
Thank
look
you.
at technology use,
Yeah.
screen time, how that affects, our children and the different ways in which children engage with screen time, that passive and active way, and also, how it impacts on your brain and development and mental health and even the physical aspects you mentioned with sleep.
Mm,
But also how we can deal with that then,
yeah.
how we can start to sort of recognize the patterns of our
Mm,
children, recognize the unhealthy ways in which they're using it, and how we can help them and
mm,
involve them in
mm,
that process to start using technology in a more healthy way.
mm.
So thank you,
Thank you for
Siobhan.
having
That's been
me.
really, really helpful. And
Mm.
as always, we have our parents listening live, and we have some questions, I believe.
Yeah.
Siobhan, do we have a question that's come in?
We do have a question from a parent who is asking that they would like to take their young child out with them to restaurants, but feel like they always have to take the iPad, and they're wondering what they can do about that.
That's a really good question,
Mm.
because you see it a lot these days, don't you? iPads being used, or even phones given to children in restaurants. And the worst ones are McDonald's
Yeah.
that have iPads
Mm.
on the children's like eating
Tables.
tables. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah. That's a really bad move from McDonald's. I mean, I'm going to be criticised here for criticising McDonald's, but yeah, um, yeah, really good question. I think, unfortunately, we're starting to become normalised to
Mm.
seeing iPads and phones being given to children
Mm.
in restaurants. Um, and what we're finding is that, families want to go out and eat together, and that's a really, really nice activity for a family to do together, because, the whole activity of eating together around a table, obviously, so having food cooked for you at a restaurant is lovely, isn't it? It's a really nice thing to do as a family. And it's such a shame when I see families they're either all on their phones or something, or the children are given devices, and what you see there is a very quiet table. But that's what it's missing, isn't it? It's those conversations, those moments for connection with family members. And I think, I really respect this parent asking for an alternative rather than giving their child their iPad. And that's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering what that child is like when they don't have the iPad.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, they haven't given any more information, unfortunately, but I'm wondering what that child's presentation is, and I'm wondering what age they are as well.
Okay.
Because what we'd hope that teenagers, for example, they have the ability to engage in a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to be doing there is setting those boundaries. Everything that you mentioned there about boundaries, about, okay, we're going out for food, we're not going to have our phones at the tables. Okay, so what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Okay, do we have a set of questions that we want to ask our kids? Instead of asking how was school, because ultimately, often the case is fine or boring or I don't want to talk about it. School isn't an interesting topic for our kids to want to talk about with their families, but talking about something that they are interested in.
Okay.
Do we have some questions that we can talk to them about? Then it's about asking those curiosity questions. I love things like would you rather question. I think they're great because they're not often questions you're asked.
No.
And when you've got to think about would you rather, eat ice cream for the rest of your life or, live on a tropical island? These different questions are, do evoke some funny conversations. And I think it's about having conversation starters like that.
Absolutely.
Can be really helpful with our teenagers. Or even card games.
Okay.
We know most teenagers are very, very good at Uno or Double or anything like that, or those old card games we used to play as kids, Top Trumps or whatever it may be, taking those to a restaurant and playing those in between the time of eating, because when we're eating, that tends to be the time where then we can enjoy the food, talk about the food, but I think it's that waiting time in between, isn't it? When we're waiting for our food and everyone's hungry, and that can be a really tricky time to manage, those feelings of hunger. If we can have those playful conversations, that can be really, really helpful in passing that time, but also having that, really important connection time. And again, for our younger children, what we've got to be mindful about our little ones is that it is normal for them to be busy.
Yeah.
It is normal for them to have a very poor attention span. So as much as you may bring, colouring books with you, they'll engage in that colouring activity for a good 3 minutes maybe, and then they'll be off and they'll be looking around, and then they'll be interested in something else. So maybe when you've got your real little ones that really struggle to sit for long periods of time, it's about having a variety of activities that can help stimulate them. So I would have colouring, I would bring the Play-Doh, I would bring a book for them to read, or for you to read with them. I would bring a little puzzle that they can do, bring a bag full of stuff, building blocks, always, restaurants are very good at catering for our little eaters, and so to have lots of activities on the table, that's really, really helpful. Maybe play a bit of I Spy. That can be a fun game for our little kids. And also taking them maybe for a walk, because again, like I said, their attention span is very short sometimes, and they can be highly distracted. So they might see something over in the corner. There might be an interesting picture on the wall, or they might want to go to the toilet for the 10th time because the hand dryers are fun in the toilet. And that's one thing that we are going to have to do with our little ones is have that freedom to think, okay, let's take them for the walk. Let's I can see they're getting bored with colouring. Let's give them the Play-Doh. Okay, they're getting bored with the Play-Doh. Let's read a book with them. It's about keeping the entertainment going for the different developmental stage of your child. Whereas teenagers do not need to have a walk around. They do not need Play-Doh. But having those conversations with them that is of interest to them, and it's something that is fun whilst we wait for our food. Because I think that's what it is. It's about managing that time, but also giving them that opportunity to take in their environment. And it's an opportunity to connect rather than it's an opportunity to distract them. And I think that's the key takeaway for me is that going out to restaurants is such a lovely thing to do as a family, and it's about valuing that time together. So I hope that answered your question, and I hope that maybe, next time you go to a restaurant, if you take with you as many objects of fun or games for your teenagers, hopefully that can help with that waiting time for the food to arrive.
Definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you again, Shuan, and thank you for the listener who wrote in that question. And please join us again for another Tonnau Talks. If you can scan the QR code on the page currently that you can see to access our live session so that you can join us live, so that you can listen live and then ask us one of those questions. That's very helpful for all our other listeners to hear. But until next time, thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for joining us for our Tonnau Talks on Screentime.